Hello and welcome. Today our second pumpkin recipe, pumpkin cookies. Just like the pumpkin bread, it's easy to make and the dough is going to freeze pretty well if you want to save some for later. So, as always, I'd like to thank everyone who's watching the videos and sharing. It really does help the channel out and means the world to me. And if you haven't already subscribed, if you enjoy this video, subscribe for more like it. Now, for the ingredients, we'll need 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 1 teaspoon ground cinnamon, 1/2 teaspoon ground nutmeg, 1/2 teaspoon salt, 1.5 cups of white sugar, 1/2 cup of butter softened, 1 cup pumpkin puree, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract or vanillin, 1 large egg, even though the picture shows 2, but that's because I'm making a double batch here and I forgot to remove the egg from the picture. Before you begin putting things together, make sure to preheat your oven to 400 degrees and have a parchment lined sheet pan or 2 ready to go. The first thing we have to do is cream the butter and sugar together. This step adds a bunch of air and starts the sugar crystals breaking down. Some chefs recommend a wooden spoon for this step if you are doing it by hand. The roughness of that wooden spoon helps you get the air in faster and helps you get more air into the mix, so that's why they recommend that. First, as you see me doing here, you're just going to need to smash the butter into the sugar. It's going to look like it's not going to mix together fully, but it actually will. So, one thing, if you have a hand mixer, I definitely recommend using it. It'll do this job in about 2 to 3 minutes, where it's going to take me a good 10 to 12 minutes by hand to get it where I want it. Once it all comes together and looks a bit like this, you're about a third of the way done. Just keep beating it for about another 10 or so minutes, and it will look like this. Once it looks like this, you're almost done. We just need to get it just a tiny bit fluffier. Once it has reached this sort of thin paste texture, it's really going to start holding onto the air while we're mixing it in. This is going to take about another 2 to 3 minutes by hand, and you're going to want to make sure you stir in quite a bit of air, since when we start mixing the wet ingredients, we don't want to lose too much there, but we are going to lose some. So once it does look like this, you are pretty much ready for your next part. The nice thing is we can add all the rest of our wet ingredients in pretty much the same time. We will lose some of our bubbles, but we're also going to be making more bubbles during the next step, so we don't have to worry too much about that. While the pumpkin is a wet ingredient, it's also going to make this dough really thick. So, like the pumpkin bread, this means it's going to be able to hold on to most of the air we beat into it. Once everything is fully incorporated, we want to beat it for just a little bit more time, just to make sure we have enough bubbles in there. It should look basically like pumpkin pie filling with some white streaks in it. Those streaks are the air bubbles. So in this case, you can see all these sort of micro bubbles on the surface and the streaks and spots. So that's the actual air we've been mixing in. For our dry ingredients, we just want to mix it together just a little bit to make sure that everything's mixed in with each other. Since the other part's currently occupying my large bowl, I don't really have a bowl quite big enough to hold this, so I'm just going to sort of gently whisk it this way. You want to do this just to make sure that you don't have a pocket of baking soda or some other flavor that would either hurt the person's experience or maybe not make it turn out as well because it did clump. Now we just have to slowly mix our dry ingredients in 1/3 at a time. Using a sieve like this helps get your dry ingredients mixed a little bit more and also breaks up any powders that might be stuck together. You don't have to get all of each of the third mixed in, just 70 to 80% will work because you just want to get most of it in there so it's not a stack of flour. From there, just keep mixing everything until everything's nice and almost smooth. You'll be able to see the bubbles that we've been making throughout this process as you're mixing it because you'll see that go through there. I'm using a dough whisk here, which is specifically made for stuff like this and to not knock out air. But if you don't have one, just a wooden spoon will work and you can do that pretty easily. Once everything's nice and uniform in color and almost smooth, we are ready to put our dough on a parchment lined sheet pan to get baking. So these cookies will expand a bit, but not by a huge amount. You'll want to make sure you leave about 1.5 inches to 2 inches between each cookie and the sheet pan's walls. I'm using a portion scoop here and a bit messily at that, but if you don't have one of those, any spoon should work. You just want to kind of make them all round as possible and about the same size. Once you have everything ready, it is time to go into the oven. We're going to now turn our oven down to 350 degrees and bake this for 15 to 18 minutes. So while this bakes, let's look a little bit about the recipe. The consistency these are going to have will be super soft, almost an in-between from a pumpkin bread or a cake and a normal cookie. I made a double batch here since I had 2 cups of pumpkin puree. We baked about 1/3 of it and froze the rest. It's going to make a lot of cookies. If you freeze some for later, make sure to let it defrost fully and come up to room temperature before you bake it again. And if you want to give it a 20 or 30 second vigorous beating with a spoon to get a few lost bubbles back before you bake it, that would help too. This will get you back to the same texture that you had in the non-frozen ones, with no real loss in flavor at all. Even if you don't add more air, the cookies will still be soft, just not quite as fluffy. Once your cookies are done, let them cool for at least 15 minutes before eating. As you probably saw in the thumbnail, I also decorated a few of these. So, if you want to, this is how I did my decorations. Note, if you are decorating, you're going to need them to be completely cooled down, so you're going to want to wait about 1 to 2 hours just to make sure the frosting doesn't melt and slide right off. I used a number 9 and a number 4 piping tip to make little wreaths out of some of the cookies that were round. I used an actual buttercream regular frosting here because I had some left over from another project. I used the 9 for the green parts of the wreath, and I used the number 4 for the bows. The vanilla buttercream actually worked really well for taste and complemented the pumpkin flavor really well. If you do this recipe and you want the red, use gel food coloring, because if you use liquid food coloring, you're going to have to use a metric ton of it, and it's just so it won't show up pink, and then the food is just going to taste like red food coloring. So definitely make sure you use gel if you're going to do this. And with that, we have made some great tasting pumpkin cookies and even dabbled a bit into decorating. Pumpkin cookies are really only available in fall in shops and stores outside, which is kind of a sad thing since they really do taste good and they're not necessarily just a fall sort of thing. But with this recipe, you can make them anytime you want and you're not going to have to wait till fall since you can make them anytime. Oh yeah, one of the small cans of pumpkin ends up being about 2 cups, so double batches and freezing are a great idea because you can just work that in and just use the 1 can. So, for anyone who has watched this far, thank you for watching, and if you're not already subscribed, subscribe for more like this, hopefully with less verbal problems. And also, have a great day and a great meal.